Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Jonathan, and welcome. It's Monday, and we're going into the Bible verse of the day. Today's Bible verse is a really great one from the book of Philippians. And like we always do here, we're going to study the Word of God. We're going to do the inductive study, which involves observation, first step, interpretation, second step, and application to our life. That's the third step. Of course, as I have told you before, this is my personal take on the inductive study. We do a lot of not only the studying of the original word. This is what's called exegesis and hermeneutics, which is extracting from the original and then interpreting. We do a lot of that. And then we use the colors, highlighters, we use the symbols, annotations in the text so that we can have a complete visual of what the original language is telling us, and then we can make a good application to our life. So I invite you to do this with me. We're going to go directly into the text right now. I'm going to put it in the screens so you can see the text, and you can underline, and you can use the colors and do the annotations, all of that with me as I'm doing it, so that we do it together. All right, here we go. Okay, here we are, and it's in the book of Philippians, the Bible verse of the day, chapter 2, verse 12, and it says, "So then, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling." Now, let me give you a little bit of context here, and we're going to read it again. And I always recommend that you read this Bible verse many times. Now, you always have to put this in context, especially, we're doing the first step, observation, especially when you observe that there's a so then. So this is telling you already, let me make a little annotation here. So this so then, it's telling you already that there's a context. It's telling you that this Bible verse is coming from a context. Now we're going to talk a little bit about it in just a little bit once we're starting interpretation, but that's the first step, is observation. Observe the Bible verse, read it many times. Now the context also in this text, you got to see the book context. This is a book written by Paul. So when he refers to himself, when he says, just as you have always obeyed, not in my presence only, so this is not the presence of God. So for example, when we use the colors, normally when we talk about God or his presence or a reference to God, we will use the color purple. In this case, you got to see the context. This is not God speaking. This is Paul speaking about him as a pastor and as an apostle, his work with the church of Philippi. So the church of Philippi, which is this letter to the Philippians, is a church that was based in the city of Philippi, and it's a letter addressed to them, and this is what he's talking about. So he's talking to them when he says my beloved. He's talking to them, to the church, and then he's giving them instructions. All right, so that's the context of it. So as we read, we're going to read it again from the context of, this is Paul giving instructions to the church, and in the same way that this church was receiving these instructions are for you and for me, the church of Jesus Christ, the church of the same God of Paul, the same God of the Philippians is the same God that we have, that we believe on. So we have these instructions for us too. So that's the context of it. So let's go to read it again. It says, "So then, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling." So the main message is over here. You see, first he's kind of stating what's already happened. Now he gives a teaching or an advice to them. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling. And this is something that I want you to realize that is for you too. We gotta be working out our salvation with fear and trembling. Now, what is he referring to in terms of, we're still in first step one, observation, looking at the context. What is he referring here? In my presence and in my absence. Well, remember that the Apostle Paul, he was a missionary, he was an apostle. So as a missionary, he would go to a church, he would start a church with them, and he would kind of teach them, but then he would leave to start another church or to go to visit another church. And in his absence, the church, so this is what he's talking about. He's saying, when I was there, I was witness of it. You were obeying the Lord, and you were obeying God's commandments, and you were in his will. And I know that even in my absence, you continue to do the same. And then comes the advices, and this is what I want you to continue to do. And then he says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. All right, so let's go into the annotations. As I always tell you, I recommend that you go read this Bible verse in many different versions. You can use the BibleHub.com, put this Bible verse in, and then you read it in different versions. And then I go to the original text, to the lexicon, and to the interlinear Bible, and I go to see what the Greek, in this case, this is from the New Testament, so the Greek language tells me from the original text. All right, so as we already made here a little annotation, we're just going to make it really quickly. I'm going to put here context. So the fact that it's telling me so then tells me that there's a context to it, and I'm going to talk to you about it in just a little bit. My beloved, just as you have always, and here, beloved, just as an observation, it really doesn't affect. Remember, this part is where he's just describing. So this is describing what's going on. So it's not necessarily a message from God, but there's an example for you. Okay, so, and we're going to note that in just a little bit. But my beloved, it uses the word agape or agape, which is the Greek word for that committed love, for that godly love. And this is the way he expresses how he loves the church and how he loves to hear the news of how good they're doing. So that's just an observation. I'm going to put it here. It doesn't necessarily affect the interpretation of the text. You know, it doesn't matter. It's just a way that he refers to them specifically. This is specifically to them, just a reference of love, but he's using the Greek agape. All right, just a reference. Which, remember, agape refers to committed love, sacrificial love, and the type of love that God has for us and that we should have for each other. So, well, he's saying, so then, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed, just as you have always obeyed. Now, we're going to study this one, obeyed. This word can be translated to being attentive. Being attentive. Another translation can be follow authority. You've been obedient, you follow authority, you've been attentive, you listen. That's another implication of it. Listen carefully. So he's saying you have always done this very well. You've always been attentive, you always follow authority, you always listen carefully. So that's good. And then he continues to say, not as in my presence only. So what he's saying here in the Greek, this expression, in my presence only, it's basically the same as you understand it, but when I am near. The word near is implied here. When I'm near, you behave well. Okay, but then it says, but not much more. But now it says much more in my absence. He's saying, so, and here I'm going to make an annotation here. Here where it says now much more, it can also be translated to even more. So you've done it when I'm present, when I'm near, and even when I'm not near, which takes me to the expression that we have here, in my absence. This word absence, let me see. Okay, here it is. Basically means while away. So while I'm away, you continue to be obedient. You continue to follow the authority. In this case, the authority of, and from the beginning, the authority of Jesus. It's not, so they are proving that it's not the authority of Paul that they are following, but they're actually able to follow Jesus in the absence of Paul, even while Paul is not near. So then here's the message. So the main message that we can get for us is this last part where it says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. What is he saying when he says work out your salvation? Where the first part, we're going to zoom in here, work out this expression work out can be translated to continue. Continue. It's talking about a continuous verb. Continue to work on. To work. Let me do that again. Continue to work on. Or it can be translated to finish. Finish working. In other words, I'm going to put here in parentheses this is more my interpretation. In other words, it's saying complete what you started. In other words, I'm going to put even another interpretation here. Don't quit or give up. All right, so that's the encouragement here from Paul. He's saying, just as when I was there, you were obedient to the Lord, you were following God, you were doing great. Now, in my absence, you have continued to do that, but this is how I want you to see it. This is what he says, guys. See it as something that you have started and you have to continue to work on. You are not finished. You are not done. So it's saying, work on your salvation. Work on your relationship with God. Let's see what salvation means here. This is the Greek word soteria. I'm going to put it down here. Soteria. This is the Greek word, which refers, even though it can be translated, let me put it here, this is why I'm mentioning, because this salvation can be translated to rescue and can also be translated to safety. Okay? But this word soteria is usually mainly for the salvation that we receive from God, even though it's used for other types of salvation. For example, somebody saved someone that was in danger. Oh, there was salvation, there was a rescue, it's now in safety. But it's very widely used in the type of salvation that God did for us, because he rescued us from death, he rescued us from sin, he rescued us from darkness into light, into salvation. He rescued us from hell. He rescued us from our past. He rescued us. That's the salvation that we receive. From the condemnation of sin into the blessing of his forgiveness and his love and his grace. So he's saying, what God has done in you, you need to allow him, you need to keep working in making sure that it's still working on you. You see, he's saying continue to work in your Christian life. That salvation that you receive from the Lord, you gotta complete it, you gotta finish. Don't quit, don't give up. Don't say, well, I've been a Christian already for 2 years. I think that's pretty much good. This is not a university degree where you go to it for 4 years and you're done with it, and now you can just go about yourself. This is kind of what this is talking about. Some people might be thinking, well, I've been doing this Christian thing for 5 years. I think I graduated enough. I don't think I need to go to church anymore. I've listened to hundreds of sermons and that's enough. No, God is saying, I still have more for you. Just as I saved you in the beginning, that's why there's a big relation here of what God did with you, something that he started, that you need to keep working because it's not finished. God is not finished with you. Don't give up. Don't quit. Finish working on your salvation. Finish working on what God has called you to do. That's what this is talking about. Continue to do it. Now, how do you do this? How do you work continually in your salvation? Well, it says, do it with fear and trembling. Let's zoom in here, with fear and trembling. Now, this fear, there's a big reference in the Bible from fear to respect. Respect and also reverence. Reverence, and this refers to God. You see, if you are, let's see if you can see the context of this passage. It's saying, when I was there, when I was near, you had that respect that I was there, therefore you were obeying and you were behaving well. When I left, you continue to do that, but don't quit. So that's what I say, but don't quit, don't stop, continue. Okay, almost like say, because Paul was actually the book of Philippians, you see, this is the context, you need to know, was written from jail. Paul was in jail, so he had no certainty that he was ever going to go back to see this church. So he's telling them, I'm probably not going to be back there. So you don't have that thought of, you probably don't have that thought of, well, Paul might be coming at some point, so let's make sure that we're behaving. Our pastor might be coming soon. No, he's saying, I might not be coming, but you need to realize that you got the presence. You got to respect the presence of God. You got to have reverence towards God, because he is there. He is near. You don't see him as you saw me, but he is near. And that is, now let me go back to it. What Paul is saying here, with fear and trembling, has a big relationship to the so then here. Because what is the context? Well, if you read a little bit of the context of this passage, you'll see that Paul is talking here about the presence of God in them. You see, this passage is talking about God, his presence in the church, his presence working in them. So therefore, what he's saying is, hey, look, when I was there, you did great. When I've been away for this little time, you've been doing good, but don't quit. Keep working in your salvation. Continue to work. Finish the work that God has started in you. Complete what God has started. Don't give up. Continue, because I might not be there, but the presence of God, look at the context, the presence of God, what he started in you, if you see his presence with respect and with reverence, so much so, and let me see how he puts it. He says, fear and trembling. Trembling literally means to shake, or shaking with fear. Shaking with fear. So what he's saying is, this trembling is an actual reaction to fear. What he's saying is that the way that we live our lives is in a real reaction towards the respect that we have in God. Let me put it this way. You see, you can say, oh yeah, I'm afraid of this, but it doesn't affect your life. You see, some people say, oh yeah, I'm afraid of, let me put a silly example. Some people say, I'm afraid of clowns. That doesn't make you do nothing. But it doesn't matter really in your life. You're afraid. You can be, so people can be living a religious life saying, oh yeah, I fear God, but it's not producing nothing. So that's what Paul is talking about. He's saying it's a respect that takes you to action. You're almost shaking because you actually feel that God is there. Not because fear of he's going to hurt you or he's going to, no, that's not what this is talking about. It's not about that kind of fear. It's the respect to know that he is real, and therefore if you obey him and if you see that his presence is there with you, you will receive the blessings that he has for you. Therefore, there's a big implication here about the presence of God in them, the presence of God working in them. All right, that's awesome, right? There's so much here. Of course, we could, like I always say, I could be talking about this one Bible verse here for an hour. We don't have that time. I'm about to close this video. But it's important for you to see the context is very important. Bible, always read it with its context. That's why I always encourage you to read and see the context of it. Even though we're studying just one Bible verse, we're always keeping in mind the context of it, okay? All right, so let's go and use the highlighters. Basically, I'm going to use the green first, which is going to tell me the things that I should be doing. What's my part, right? Remember, I always use the green to see what's my part in this Bible verse. What's the part that I need to be doing? Well, the part that I need to be doing mainly for me is to work out in my salvation with fear and trembling. Okay, so I'm going to highlight this part. There we go. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Now, you may say, well, why are you not doing green this? Just as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence. Well, because according to the context, this is something that the church in Philippi was already doing. So this tells me, hey, there's an example there, there's a teaching, what they did, whether what Paul was there and when Paul wasn't there, they were obeying. But then he tells them, this is what you should do, and by implication, what I should do. I'm going to use yellow. I'm going to use the yellow highlighter for the other part, because there's an example there. There's an example of a church, and there's an example of people that are not hypocrites. They're not fakers. They are not people that just when they're being seen, they act as Christians. No. even when nobody's looking. You see, that's a great message there. Who are you when no one's looking? How do you behave when no one's looking? How do you behave when you're alone? How do you behave when no one is around you and you have access to, for example, things on TV that you shouldn't be seeing, access to go to places that maybe you shouldn't be going to I don't know, see things or hear things that you shouldn't be hearing, or hanging out with the people that you shouldn't be hanging out when someone doesn't know what you're doing. You see what I'm saying? There's a big teaching here, and that's why I will put it in yellow, and I will show you a new symbol. So now that we have done that, let me show you a new symbol that I have. This symbol, it's a new one, so I'm gonna put it right here at the beginning. Well, actually, over here. Just as you've always. This symbol is like this, and I'm gonna tell you what it means. Just a second. One second. I made a little mistake here. Uh-oh. Something is not working. Okay, here we are. Let me see. Okay. Something happened there. So I do a E, and then let me make sure I'm doing it right. Oh my, yeah. E like that, and then a little arrow that will go here like this, going forward, just like that. That's my symbol for an example to follow. Example to follow. So every time in the Bible that I see someone doing something, or someone being doing something that is a good example, if I find a good example that I should follow, in this case, for example, this is a perfect place to use it, because this is not necessarily something that I'm doing. I mean, let me put it this way. It's describing, like I said before, it's describing something that the church did, and then I can read that and I say, oh wow, yeah, this church was really good. There's other churches that didn't do that. Actually, other churches, as soon as their pastor turns around, they start sinning. Just like you remember in the book of Moses. In the book of Exodus, when Moses went up to the mountain to speak with God, he left them. He left the people of Israel and said, "Hey, I'm gonna go up to speak with God." And they were good. They were. They loved God, and they were expecting Moses to come. But Moses took too long up there, according to them. In their thoughts, he's like, "Oh man, Moses is taking too long." What did they do? Moses comes back and they're worshiping an idol. They made themselves a cow, a golden cow or a golden calf. They made an idol and they're worshiping, so much so that Moses saw that and he broke the tablets of the commandments. So they were fine when Moses was there, but as soon as Moses was absent, they went astray. You see, that's an example not to follow. Don't follow that example. But in this case, there's an example to follow. So I'm using that symbol. I like that symbol and I like using it because every time I read my Bible and see that, I go and read it and say, oh yeah, that's a good example to follow. Obey when you're in the presence of your leaders, of your authority, and of others, but also much more when they're asked. Be the same person that you are, the same Christian that you are. Be in church and when you're not in church. Oh man, there's a sermon here. Be a Christian when you are among other Christians, and also when you're in those places at your workplace. Are you being a witness? Are you being different? Are you being a Christian? Or you only behave as a Christian when you're being seen? And when you're being seen, oh yes, glory to God, hallelujah. And when you're not being seen, it's all beep, 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 bad words, huh? So God is speaking to me here. He's telling you, there's a great example here. This church, they obeyed in the presence and they obeyed in the absence. Obeyed, all right? Okay, let me keep going. So there's an example to follow there. And then right here at the beginning of Work Out Your Salvation, this is the advice. So I see that there's an advice for me. I'm going to use my symbol, which is the traffic light, okay? Let's put it there really quickly. And we're gonna put the colors: red, yellow, and green. Okay, so that tells me there's the advice for me. There's an example, and then there's an advice. You've been doing this, but don't stop doing it. The advice for us is keep working on it. Keep working on your life and in your salvation. Keep being a Christian. Don't be a hypocrite. Keep doing what you're doing. Do it till the end, knowing that God is there, knowing that respect God's presence. You see, that's why people say, do you not fear God? What that's saying is, do you not know that God is there with you? Fear God with such a fear and such a respect that takes you to action. Fear and trembling. It's a type of respect that actually takes you to action. It's not a type of respect that is just an abstract thing. It actually takes you to action. Then I'm going to say here, work out your salvation. I'm going to say here because it's talking about something that doesn't finish. You know, when it says continue to work, it's talking about not something that you're finished, work out or finish. It's keep doing. It's a continual verb. It talks to me about process. So I'm going to use here my symbol of process, which is these steps. And I always highlight it with the blue or baby blue highlighter. It's telling me, so this Bible verse is telling me, this is the process, this is the journey of life. Keep working on your salvation. Keep working on doing what God's will every day. So I have that. And then the salvation, I actually have a symbol. Every time that the Bible talks about salvation, and it's a very simple one, it's an S. So every time, this is a new symbol too, so you have two new symbols today. Every time that the Bible talks about salvation, I do this symbol. I know it's almost like a Superman symbol, but it's like a, sorry, let me do it again. It's a diamond. It's supposed to be a diamond because it reminds me of the value of salvation, and it reminds me of the security of salvation, or how strong our salvation is. I'm trying to make this the best way possible. All right. And then I do it with red. I highlight it with red because the red reminds me of where my salvation comes from, which is through Jesus, and his blood, his sacrifice for me brought that salvation. Soteria, right? Okay, so there we go. Those are the symbols that we have for today. So let's read it and let's finish this study of the day. So this is telling us, so then, just as I've been speaking to you about the presence of God in your life, just as the context of this passage tells us that God is with you, well, in the same way that I'm talking to you about God is with me, well, I want you to follow the example, or in this case, he's talking to them, but in this case, in my application for me, is follow the example of the church of Philippi, this church that when Paul was this church was always attentive. They would always follow authority. They always listen carefully. They were good Christians. They were humble. They weren't rebellious, because they were always obedient in the presence of Paul when he was near and when he was with them, but even more when Paul was away. But he's a message for me and for you and for the church of Philippi. He's saying, here's an advice. Continue to be like that. Continue to be a Christian even when you think nobody's watching. Continue in this process of life. Finish what you started. What God has started with you, he has not completed it yet. Continue to discover all the greatness and the marvels of living a Christian life. Continue your life. Don't quit. Don't give up. Continue with God's process. Continue with God's life that takes you from glory to glory, from triumph to triumph. Continue going up, enjoying the salvation, the rescue, what Jesus has done for you. And in which way am I going to do it? How can I continue to work in my salvation? Well, by having fear that takes you to action, a respect towards God, a reverence to God, a knowledge that he is there and he's always with you and he's watching. And I don't want to sadden my God. I don't want to disappoint my God. He is watching. Therefore, I'm not going to do the things that I shouldn't be doing. I'm going to keep myself from the temptations of this world. I want to keep, and I'm going to work in my salvation, and I want to keep myself away from the other things because God is with me. All right, that's an awesome Bible verse. I hope he spoke to you just as he's speaking to me. I'm enjoying these Bible verse studies. I know they're really good, and there's much more. I'm sure that you guys, I encourage you to go down in the comments, and if you found something that God is speaking to you, or just an expression of what I'm saying that spoke to you today, put it in the comments. Say, God's speaking to me about this, or just share something and say, this is so good, and then put what you think is good. For me, if I have to say something, I think what I pull out of this verse is the example part. What I pull out of this verse is saying, I want to be the same character and the same integrity in my life when people are looking and when people are not looking, in the presence of people and in the absence of people. Who am I when I'm alone? And the question is for you too. Who are you when no one's looking? Who are you? How do you behave when no one's looking? Oh man, that's a challenge for me. I want to continue to be working in my salvation, working in my relationship with my God, with fear, with His presence in me, and with the knowledge that He's there. All right, that's the Bible verse of the day. I hope that you're encouraged today. I am encouraged, and I'm gonna go pray, and I hope you go pray too, and thank Him for the salvation, and commit to be obedient even when no one's looking. All right, God bless you. Bye bye.